You started a career path and have been grinding away, maybe all the way to the top. But you've decided the career you've dedicated your life to isn't the career you want to dedicate your life to. Now is just the beginning. Starting out or starting fresh. It's time to become the work experience kid. Am I the world's biggest sucker? I have a feeling I might be. I don't mind travelling. I don't mind getting out of Australia and checking out somewhere new, but I'm paying thousands and thousands of dollars to do that. This episode is with Megan Butler, an international airline pilot, and it's occurred to me that she gets paid to fly somewhere, and a whole bunch of other people as well. She gets to hang out in a new international destination, and then she gets to come home. I want to know what it's like to become an international airline pilot, and maybe, just maybe, I want to do it myself. Think about all of the stories that an international airline pilot might have from being overseas. You know, a night here, they saw this thing, they did this, they did that. Those are some stories that you might like to keep and tell your kids or your grandkids. Or maybe you have a family member who was a pilot in their younger years and now they've got some awesome stories. You can capture them in the Memory Maker podcast with Ed Calishaw. He'll interview somebody in your life, maybe even you. He'll then create like an audio file. Podcast is a good way to describe it, but it's only for you and the people you want to hear. It's not a public thing like this one. Memory Maker podcast with Ed Calishaw. If you're interested in that, hit up the website workexperiencekid.com, hit the guest tab, then find Ed Calishaw's name. Megan, welcome to the Work Experience Kid podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm feeling very privileged to be invited along.
And we're privileged to have you on the pod because I don't let just anybody on. There's a couple of criteria. You've got to be good at what you do, you got to love what you do, and you have to be up for sharing your story to tell people how they might be able to go about doing what you do. I also have a weird recording schedule, and thank you for making time for it, but I have caught you during a reno, so hopefully we don't hear too much noise from the tradies. Otherwise, maybe we'll just get you to pop outside or pop inside or just work around that noise. So I guess now is a good time to get into it, Megan. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what you're up to now?
Basically, what I'm doing now is I am currently employed as an international airline pilot, but we have baby number 2 due in 3 weeks. So I'm currently out of the skies, not flying at the moment, just doing a bit of work from home stuff and helping out actually with some pilot recruitment, which has been really interesting to get into a different aspect of the airline business. But I finish up that in a week as well. So about to be back to full-time mum life, but when I'm not full-time mumming, I am a full-time airline pilot.
That is a whole lot to unpack from the first question. I want to talk about the mat leave sort of thing, and I want to talk about this pilot recruitment stuff, but let's just put that to the side for the moment. How long have you been a pilot?
So I have been flying for about 13 years now. So I was straight out of school knowing I wanted to be a pilot and have probably been just very gun-ho about pursuing that career. So since I was 22, I have been flying for airlines.
That's a long time.
On 13 years now. It is. Time flies though.
And you've, if you will, you always wanted to be a pilot through school and everything.
Yes. I probably consider myself one of the lucky ones who always knew what I wanted to do. Always had a passion for aviation. It was introduced to me very early on in life. And so throughout my high school years, I always knew that's the direction I wanted to head in. So I looked at all the different options, how to achieve that. And here I am today, living the dream.
So what drew you into aviation from such a young age?
My dad used to fly just as a hobby. So when we were kids, my brother and I would get to go up in a light aircraft and just do some local scenic flying. And from that point onwards, I had the bug. I just knew that that's where I needed to go with my career and that aviation was my passion.
That's so cool. As a kid, my neighbour used to fly Cessnas, those small planes. And he took me up one time, and this plane had like dual controls. And at one point in the air, like we just cruised about, and he's like, grab the wheel. You're flying now. And as a kid, that was the best part. Was your dad taking you up in a similar kind of plane? And did you get a chance to do something like that?
So most of them, that's right, have dual controls. And so the pilot in command sits in the left seat, and then you can have a passenger sit in the right seat. But yes, I was given that opportunity quite early on. And then, started looking into the different pathways of trying to turn that into a career.
And what pathway did you end up taking straight out of school?
So initially I started learning to fly just through a local flying school when I was still at school. So that was probably like my senior year of school. I did what they call a restricted pilot license, which is sort of like your base level of license. And then there are a few different pathways you can take. One that I chose to go through was I initially went to university and studied a Bachelor of Aviation. And then partway through that, I actually got offered the opportunity to interview for an airline cadetship program. So I went and did that, was lucky enough to be successful. They're quite competitive, particularly the one I went through. It's sort of, I guess, was a niche one in that it was one of the few that guaranteed you a job at the end of the program. Not all of the Australian airline cadetships offer that opportunity.
Okay, that's a good pick.
So then left uni, went and pursued that, lived on their campus and basically lived and breathed flying for about 12 months. And that takes you from an ab initio with very little training all the way through to a private license, then a commercial license. And then you also get what they call an instrument rating as part of that, which is necessary for any airline gig. 12 months doing that. And then I started flying for a regional airline.
Okay, that seems like a very intense... You're coming in with a whole lot of info, which I have to write down. We'll come back to it. Firstly, do you think you need that uni degree or go to uni for this?
You don't have to, no. That is just one of the pathways to becoming a commercial pilot.
Would you recommend for someone like me looking to change careers, would you go that university route again? Or do you think there might be a different, maybe perhaps more streamlined way to get in?
The university courses that are offered around Australia are good courses. Most of them have a theory component and also a flying component to them. So you will also not only walk away with a degree, but they will be attached to a flying school. So you will get to do both simultaneously. And the beauty of that, of course, is that you could HEX your training. So
True.
One of the huge things about considering being a pilot as a career is the cost of the training. So for anyone looking to get into it, that's going to be a huge consideration as to how are you going to manage that expense, because it's not a small amount. So
right.
Obviously the uni pathway, that's great. You can do the HEX program, or there would be the avenue of self-funding, and you could go to your local flying school and say, I want to do my training to get my commercial license. And they'd say, okay, great. Where's your $100,000?
Yeah, very expensive, isn't it? So HEX is a great option.
For sure.
And you mentioned instrument ratings. Can you just quickly tick off what that is?
Yeah, sure. So basically there's two different types of ratings when you get a pilot license. One of them, when you start initial training, is called a VFR, or a visual flight rating. So when you first learn to fly, everything's done off maps and visual cues. And then when you start progressing into what they call the IFR, or instrument rating, that is when you start utilizing different ground-based aids and technology within the aircraft to essentially fly without those visual cues. So you're looking at your instruments to situate yourself, to navigate, and that's what all the airlines do. So, you see the big jet flies off and it's going through all the clouds, and you think, oh, how does it know where it is? Well, the pilots are just using all the equipment within the aircraft and all that technology to navigate themselves.
Instrument ratings, I imagine, would also include when there's a failure and you can then do it all manually, just to oversimplify things.
Yes, correct. There's a lot of, obviously, the technology in bigger, newer aircraft, it has a lot of redundancy built into it. That's why you would hear that, modern jet aircraft can now land themselves, for instance, because there's just so much technology built into them and so much redundancy that the plane can basically fly itself almost.
Yeah, so there's a heap of automation. We know you're a highly skilled pilot and everyone in the cockpit is highly skilled. What's the degree of automation versus you actually controlling the controls and physically flying the aircraft?
A lot of our workload in the sort of international operation that I do now comes in around the start, where we've got a lot of information, as you can imagine, to sift through for such a long flight. We're looking at weathers all along the way. We're looking at plan A, B, C, D if things were to happen along the flight. And a lot of our sort of high workload, I would suggest, is in that pre-flight phase before the aircraft takes off. So when the passengers are waiting to board and then boarding, we're up the front in the flight deck. That's probably when we're at our busiest, making sure that we are entering, cross-checking all the data that's being entered into the flight computers. We're briefing all the scenarios that could happen and what our plan of attack is if something unforeseen was to happen, that sort of thing. So
Sure.
Once we sort of have the aircraft in the air, that's when our workload decreases dramatically and we become, I suppose, more of a monitoring role. So just making sure that all the aircraft systems are working as expected and obviously keeping an eye on the dynamic environment, such as weather updates, what the wind's doing, what our fuel situation's doing, and making sure that the aircraft's doing what we wanted it to do. But yeah, a lot of that high workload stuff is before we even push back from a bay.
There's a whole lot of work you guys are doing, and I don't know anything about it. And then we're going very deep in what you're currently doing right now, but then like when you're in the air, you've prepared for all these scenarios. What do you call it? Like a simulation or something?
Oh, yes, a simulator.
Yes, that's it.
That's probably another big aspect to this role is its constant ongoing training and learning. Obviously, aviation is a very dynamic environment and things are changing all the time in terms of like regulatory things, technological advancements within aircraft. So we're always training. We jump in the simulator for 2 days every 6 months. And that's just to really just hone those skills of, decision-making, task prioritization, dealing with multiple failures, and just preparing ourselves as best as possible for if something unforeseen were to happen. Obviously, the chances are very low and air travel is one of the safest forms of transportation, but it probably comes down to, because of that consistent training and that high level of discipline and skill that they expect from pilots.
There's been a handful of crashes and accidents over the last couple of years, and just hearing what the pilots have done to avoid catastrophe. I mean, there has been some catastrophic events as well, but even like that movie, which was was it Sully, the Hudson River, New York, where the plane landed on the river. Sure, there's probably a little bit of Hollywood scattered across all of that, but what was really impressive is just the thought process that actually helped save so many lives. And for somebody like me, who's only been a passenger, you go, holy shit, that's a whole lot of knowledge and skills for something that is never going to happen. It's now happened, and you still know how to navigate that. So that's really impressive. And that's obviously why you're in the simulator so often, is just refreshing some of those skills.
And I think a big part of that is learning the skill to not react on like the fight or flight reaction that would naturally come to you. It's trying to take a breath, process the information in front of you, stay calm, and deal with it in a logical manner.
That's something that I would need to work on as a pilot. So I'm a bit nervous about potentially getting to this field. Just on the simulator and all the skills and knowledge you have around that, there's this thing, especially on social media, a lot of men think that if there was a situation where both pilots are, knocked out, both have a heart attack or whatever, that they could enter the cockpit and fly the plane or land it safely. Do you reckon a random guy, for example, me, could do that?
Look, I'm going to say no. No, not by any means to discredit you or I'm sure the many skills that you have in your tool bag. There's probably a chance of being talked through some of it if someone was on the other end of a radio and you could figure out how to communicate with them, possibly, but I doubt it.
Yeah, fair enough. So I've never said that I could fly a plane. I have a mate who has dabbled in Microsoft Plane Simulator 1993, and he's overconfident. But it's not like a man to be overconfident in their skills using a program that is 30 years out of date.
Look, maybe if you've spent a bit of time on that program, then possibly that would help. But look, to be honest, it's a lot of training. It's very niche. And I think that's what everyone is so fascinated about aviation, because it is such a niche industry that not a lot of people get the privilege to have the insight into. I think that's why every time I speak to someone and mention what I do, it's always spikes people's interest, absolutely.
And it's always a man. He's all surprised.
Well, yeah, we can talk about that part of it if you want to. Look, it's certainly has been a very male-dominated industry for a very long time. If I'm looking back from when I started looking into becoming a pilot and being female, probably that was one of the concerns I had, was how is the culture with the gender stereotypes? I suppose I thought walking into it that it might have been a bit of a boys' club. From my experience, mine has been so positive, and I cannot say that enough, but it's probably been the timing of when I've entered the industry. Over the last 15 years, there was that big cultural shift. Certainly tip my hat to women that would have gone in, let's say 30 years ago. I think it would have been quite a different experience, but my entire career to date, I've had nothing but positive experiences coming in as a female into this role. And it's certainly just become one of those things now where I might turn up to work. A lot of the trips I fly, there's 4 pilots, and it might be that I'm signing on and there's 3 pilots I've never flown with before, and chances are it's 3 males. I never get treated differently. I always just feel as if I'm part of the team. And so I guess what I want to put across is that if there's females that may have that same anxiety that I had, that's not really warranted anymore. Like the culture has just had such a positive shift in that regard. And I honestly love my job. I feel like I'm one of the few people that is lucky to say that. And I don't feel like I get treated any differently for being female.
That's awesome to hear. So it's a great industry to be in, especially as a female pilot. But in general, it seems like it's a fairly positive one. Can you step us back to your first job? You went through uni, did all that training. What was your first job as a pilot?
So after I finished my cadet program, I went straight into the role of first officer for flying a regional airline. The aircraft seats about 30 odd. It's like a twin turboprop, and the flying is regional routes. So flying out of capital cities, but then flying into like regional towns, that sort of thing, which is actually really interesting flying because it's really hands-on. As in you're getting your hands dirty, doing more than what you would say now, more mechanically? Correct, yeah. So the regional operation, obviously that the smaller scale doesn't have staff numbers, I suppose, that you would see in a big airline. So the responsibilities for pilots in that realm are probably taking on more roles under that one umbrella. So it becomes a lot more of a team effort. You don't have a huge flight planning department that does all that behind the scenes work for you. The pilots do all that themselves. You might go out and throw some bags if you're running late and you're on a quick turnaround done on the grounds, that sort of thing. So yeah, certainly getting your hands more dirty, but it's got a lot of job satisfaction behind it too.
Okay, so if you're making the change into this career, you got to make sure you have a good back if you have to end up doing a regional stint with all these FIFO dudes with all their shit getting thrown under the plane.
That's right. You might occasionally have to throw a bag or two, so be prepared.
Okay, that's good to know. I've noted that one down. So you started off doing this regional stint. Take us from there through to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So I was a first officer on the regional aircraft for about 5 years.
Sorry, can I just jump in? What's a first officer?
Yeah, so basically you have ranks within crews. So when it's a 2-pilot crew, you'll have a captain, and a first officer is more just like the junior pilot to the captain. So I guess more of a support pilot role.
Is that what my dad would always call a co-pilot or something?
Yes, that's right. Yes, that would be the modern term now for a co-pilot.
All right, sorry, I interrupted you. So you were a co-pilot / first officer for 5 years?
Yes, and over that time, you're just building experience, you're building hours in your logbook, and then once I had enough experience, did my training upgrade to captain for the same airline. And so that role's quite similar, except that the captain has the ultimate responsibility of that aircraft. The ultimate decision for the safety of that aircraft lies with the captain. They're the ones that get paid the big bucks for that responsibility. So there's a training program to upgrade to that rank. So I did that and was a captain on the regional airline for 2 years before I then applied for one of the main carriers in Australia that operate the jets. And I've been now flying international for about 6 years now. It's a very different role. Going from obviously regional to international is a very different type of operation, but also it's meant I've gone from a captain in a regional sense to the junior pilot. So most of the flights I now operate, depends on the length of the flight, but most of them will run 4 crew. So there'll be a captain, a first officer, and what they call 2 second officers. And that's currently the role that I'm in now.
That's quite a career to get where you are now. Domestic versus international. What's the biggest difference with international travel?
I guess because you don't step into it as a captain, you step into it as a junior. That's a very different role. As a second officer, I guess you would coin it more of like a relief pilot, in that we run the operation as 4 pilot purely for fatigue management. So your role as a second officer is to support the captain and the first officer, but it's essentially so that there can always be 2 pilots on the flight deck at any one time, and the other 2 pilots will be on rest, and then we will rotate throughout the flight.
I'll tell you what you've done, Megan. You've shattered the dreams of a lot of men who think they can land a plane with Microsoft Flight Simulator because there's redundancy. You've got 2 extra pilots. So now you have to get 4 pilots out of action, so then you can land that plane.
Yeah, that sounds like a hard task, doesn't it? That sounds pretty unlikely. No, look, so there'll always be 2 pilots in the control seats, and then there are 2 seats behind them. So for takeoff and landings, there'll be all 4 pilots sitting in the flight deck. And then once we get the aircraft to a safe height, that's when 2 will go on rest, 2 will stay, and then we'll just coordinate rotating the pairs in that way. So, the crew rest is actually pretty impressive.
What are you doing? What's it like resting?
We have proper bed setups. So I fly the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. The setup for that crew rest is like a loft kind of style where there's two beds next to each other, and then there's also a seat that's sort of likened to, I suppose, a business class seat. But most of the time you just try and sleep, to be honest. The more sleep you can get, the better. But there's an art to that too. It's just not as easy as it seems.
I've been fortunate enough to land myself in business a couple of times, and I've found it very hard to sleep. I'm sure you figured it out.
Yes. I feel like some days I have and then some days I haven't.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I've landed a business class seat, and I found it hard to sleep there as well, but I also had a lot of whiskey beforehand. Oh, while we're on it, do you guys get the same movies that we get out the back? If you're flying often, I've been out of the country and you watch maybe 2 or 3 movies, and then you're flying back, but you have to make sure you fly back in a different month so they rotate them through, and then you're back in the same month and you get the same shit movies that you watched last time. Do you have what we get?
We've got the same, I'm afraid.
That is a con. I'm writing that down as what we shouldn't be looking for as a new career. The same shit movies.
Yes, unfortunately, we don't get any privilege in that area.
You hate to hear it, don't you? Now, sadly, it seems like we've gotten a little bit distracted. Just want to rewind a little bit. You've been very fortunate to be working in the aviation industry, and you've been a massive fan of it since you were a kid. Working as a pilot, what keeps bringing you back into the cockpit every day?
Look, it's such an interesting industry, and I think for me, it's just that every day is different. You don't know quite what to expect. Every flight is going to be slightly different. I'm always working with different people, different personalities. So I suppose it always keeps you on your toes. And like I said before, it's like that always, because it's so dynamic, the technology advancements, things like that changing, you're always learning and there's always those personal challenges. So I think that's what I thrive on with aviation.
Love it. We're getting to the point where I ask you some memories. Do you have a standout memory over your career so far?
I'd say when I finished my training to become a captain, that's probably a big standout. That was a huge milestone in my career. It's pretty special to have that responsibility that aircraft and all those people are ultimately your responsibility. So that's probably the most standout memory of my career to date.
It's definitely an achievement, all the work you've put in.
Now I'm in a bigger pool of fish, let's say, working for a larger company. It's mainly just going to take time now to have that opportunity again on the larger scale aircraft. But yeah, it's certainly something to look towards, and it's nice to still, forever have those goals to work towards.
From you hitting milestones, and obviously it's a great achievement, do you have a spectacular failure you can share with us?
I do. It's probably more of a hilarious personal failure. So when I first joined the airline I now fly for, obviously I'd gone from flying regional flights to international, and so I'd packed my bag the night before. I was eagerly anticipating this first trip. How exciting, new job. They've actually flown me to a different capital city the night before. They flew me out from Melbourne to Sydney, and I'm sitting there in a hotel in Sydney waiting for the transport to come get me, and I realised that I haven't packed my passport.
Oh! What happened?
So I called them. I was so upset, and I said, and luckily, because it was my first flight, I was the extra crew member, so the flight could go without me anyway. But yeah, they had to send me back to Melbourne, which was my base, and rescheduled the entire trip for me. So I didn't get to go.
Oh no!
But yeah, that was a lesson. That was a steep learning curve of. Yes, you definitely need to have passport on the checklist when you're packing a bag when you become an international pilot.
My rule when I'm flying is passport is first, and you can buy everything else.
That's a great tip.
So feel free to use that one. I'm sure you don't need any tips from me, though.
Thank you.
You obviously love what you do, but is there anything that you don't like?
Look, nobody enjoys jet lag.
This is like asking about hangovers. Is there a way that you can deal with that? How do you deal with that?
I think it is something that you honestly get used to. You just learn to be a bit kinder to yourself and not have too strict expectations. So when I go away, I just try eat when I'm hungry, sleep when I'm tired, and just look after myself as best I can. I try not to get myself too much onto that time zone because we're not there for long enough to warrant it then becoming difficult to get back on Australian time. But overall, I just try and listen to my body.
That's some good advice. I guess if you're dealing with a whole lot of jet lag, that it's a highway to burnout too, I'd imagine. So it's good to listen to yourself there.
It's certainly a role that could take its toll on your health. So yeah, certainly a priority amongst full-time airline pilots to look after yourself.
I can see why you'd want to look after yourself in your line of work, but that's also some good advice in general. Everyone should focus on looking after themselves. Top priority, and then everything else can fall into place there. You've shared some great information on how to become an international airline pilot. What am I learning more about if I have what it takes to be you? First, I want to chat about the Work Experience Kid website, workexperiencekid.com. Head to the guest tab if you like the cut of anybody on the pod's jib. And if they've got their own side project, you'll be able to see how to get in touch with them and read more about what they're doing in their own time. And maybe you can help them make their side hustle or little cashy become their full-time job, and then they can start focusing on what really drives them. All right, Megan, let's get into it. Do I have what it takes to become an international airline pilot? I've got a few questions, and depending on how you answer, you might wet my whistle. Can you tell me a little bit about what a typical day, or potentially in your case, what a week might look like?
Yeah, sure. So international, again, very, very different to what a domestic week is going to look like. Obviously, you're going to do a lot more flights over, let's say, a week. If you're flying a domestic operation, you might be flying for maybe 5 flights a day, and that might be 4 days a week, let's say. Whereas in the international week, you might be doing one return. So you might fly from Sydney to LA, let's say, and then generally the layover or time off before coming home would be around the 48-hour mark on average. So you get 48 hours in that destination to rest, recuperate, explore, whatever you feel.
Cool.
And then the flight home. And then typically you would expect to have at least 2 or 3 days at home before you went again, but it could be longer. The lifestyle with international, it's got its pros and cons. So it can be hard to be away for longer periods of time. So on average, I might be away for 4 or 5 days at a time on a trip. And then when you've got factors like having a family, that can bring complications with it.
You spend a lot of time away from home. What's it like?
It's definitely one of the aspects of this career choice that people need to consider. It's challenging, no doubt. I'm lucky I've got a partner that works from home and works for himself. So he's got some flexibility, and we've got some family support around, which makes life a lot easier. But yeah, being away for 4 or 5 days certainly has its challenges.
You're flying in, you're out for a couple of days, you then fly back. Anything else that happens in that week, or are you just dealing with rest the other times?
Most of the time it's just, yeah, like you said, rest. I think that's probably another positive aspect of this job. You are able to go to work, sign on, focus on the job at hand, and then at the end, you get to sign off, stop thinking about it, and you can focus on enjoying your home life. My husband's very jealous that I have a job where when I sign off, I switch off, he likes to say. Whereas, there are a lot of other careers out there where it can be difficult to separate your work life from your home life in terms of mentally switching off. So yeah, no, it's besides obviously the times when there's training, you've got a simulator session coming up and you're having to do refresher training, that sort of thing. It is a great job in terms of that work-life balance.
And every so often You get to spend 48 hours in LA, chill out for a bit.
Exactly. Enjoy some amazing burritos.
I should get to LA. You said earlier that most of your work is before you even push back from the terminal. What are the primary responsibilities and duties of a pilot, but let's say an international airline pilot like yourself?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, those roles sort of differ depending on your rank again, like we were describing. So the four crew would be the captain, who has the ultimate responsibility, the first officer, who is there, I guess, 2IC, and then in my operation, we're running two second officers or relief pilots. So primarily in that role, I am helping to manage the fatigue and just support the captain and first officer with anything they need. But a lot of it is cross-checking information and doing like exterior inspections on the aircraft is often designated to the second officers. So I get to go down on the tarmac and physically inspect the outside of the aircraft, which is kind of a cool job because, you know, you obviously walk through a terminal and then through an aero bridge onto an aeroplane. You don't really appreciate the grand scale of such a machine. Once you get down on the ground level and look up at the sheer size of this machine that you're operating, that you really appreciate it.
It's just so surprising how big they are. Those international ones that you're flying are massive. Who else are you working with day to day?
Yeah, so obviously we have interaction with the cabin crew as well as probably like our primary other team. So the aircraft I fly operates often 10 cabin crew, which sounds like a lot, and it is quite a lot, but throughout the flight you might only probably see 2 or 3 of them. Obviously coordinating what's happening in the cabin for our schedule up the front. And then the other team is like the flight planning department and dealing with how much fuel we're going to take, what route we're going to take, taking into consideration a lot of different factors like weather and winds and air traffic control, restrictions, that sort of thing.
Quick one on air traffic control. Everything I've seen is every pilot speaking English. Is that a thing? You need to be able to speak English? Like when you're flying to, I don't know, let's say Dubai or even Asia, just thinking the close ones to Australia, is everyone speaking in English?
English is the primary language for aviation, which is handy for being Australian. Most of the time, yes. You will often hear local carriers, maybe more domestically speaking their national language. But yes, predominantly it is English.
Okay, because my next question here is, what's the most challenging part of your job? And if you have to speak multiple languages, that's a very challenging part, but that's not a consideration.
No, thankfully no. So you do not have to be bilingual to be a pilot, thankfully. I'd say, honestly, in the international role, the most challenging part for us as pilots is staying current. It sort of takes a lot of self-discipline because we only fly occasionally versus it, again, going back to domestic where you say, you know, you're jumping in the plane and you're doing 4 flights a day. It starts to become second nature. Whereas with the international operation, you're only flying, let's say you're doing 2 flights that week and then you have a week at home. So you're not sitting in there going through the processes as often. So it doesn't come as natural. So it's more that self-discipline, I would say, of needing to mentally just go through things and stay on top of it yourself because we're not doing it as often, if that makes sense.
I suppose that's one reason why you're in the simulator so often too.
Yeah, just to hone in on those skills and make sure that everything's staying fresh in our minds.
We're sort of going full circle from jumping in the simulator and, you know, training and staying current. We mentioned before that a plane can essentially fly itself. Do you think your job has a strong future? Obviously, aviation has a strong future. People are going to travel internationally, especially from Australia. But do you think there will ever be a point where a plane will actually be flying itself?
That's a good question. It's a difficult one. There's already been experiments into having less pilots. So say rather than having the 4 crew that were operating, that they may operate just having 1 pilot up there at a time. So maybe there'd be 2 of you in total. But I can't see in the near future passengers feeling comfortable to board an unmanned flight.
We know the technology is there.
Yeah, we do. And I mean, look, as we've seen that it's started to transition with unmanned cars in that realm. But I think aviation is so different to that yes, I still think being a pilot for now has a strong future. I cannot see it being made completely redundant anytime soon.
When the redundancy kicks in, everyone's happy for that to happen when we're all retired. But don't let it happen now.
Exactly.
Over your career so far, not necessarily from your career though, have you received any valuable advice?
The main thing that sticks out to me with that question is to pursue things that you're passionate about. I love aviation. I always have. And I think that's probably the most important part with considering this as a career, is that you need to have that underlying passion for the industry. It's a great job, but it can be a long road. It can be competitive. It can be expensive. It can be not all the glitz and glam that people may perceive it to be. The road can be bumpy. So I would say pursue your passions.
I totally agree about pursuing your passions, and you're not the first guest on the pod to say that. I want to unpack that a little bit more. I'm so glad to hear that you're following your passion. And just in the conversation we've had so far, a captain gets paid well. Going
Yes.
from your experience, you had to throw bags in the bottom of a plane. And a lot of people go, oh, a captain gets paid really well. Sure, they do. But there's a lot of shit you have to do to get there. And if you're not passionate about flying the aircraft and everything else that goes with it, you're going to be in for a long journey. And, you know, you've been doing it for 15 years or something, and you've still got more time to go. And it's so good that you're passionate about it, because a lot of people wouldn't want to invest more time to get their big bucks. That's what they're seeing. Same with doctors, I guess. A very similar situation. We had Dr. Caitlin Tadd on, who after 15 or so years is now a fully qualified psychiatrist. Pilots being another one. So yeah, passion really speaks to that. Going from following your passion, advice that you've received, do you have any advice that you might give to someone wanting to become a pilot?
If people were considering it, make sure that you do love it. And the easiest way I'm going to say to solidify that answer is going to be find a local flying school. If you haven't done already, call them up, organize an introductory to flight training lesson where you go up with an instructor. They talk you through some really basics with flying and just see how you feel after that. Because unless you walk away from that experience feeling reassured that that's the direction you want to take, it's going to be a hard road.
You're about to go on mat leave. What's mat leave like for a pilot? If you're a regular civilian, you're not allowed to fly at a certain time. That obviously has to apply to you as well. What do you do in that time? Do you have to take mat leave earlier?
So I'm fortunate that flying for a larger airline, they are super supportive of female pilots in general, and then also this journey of having a family. So yeah, 30 weeks is the regulatory restriction on how far you can fly. And then I'm fortunate that the company then has to find me what they consider a safe duties non-flying role. So that's how I've landed myself helping out with a bit of pilot recruitment within the organisation, which has been actually really interesting to be involved in another aspect of the business and see how that side of things all work, being on the other side of the interview table, if you will. So I've been doing some work with that until I'm ready to transition into the maternity leave.
Can you quickly give us an overview of what you're doing with pilot recruitment? I feel like the definition is in the title, and maybe we can get a pilot recruitment officer or whatever you call them on to talk about that. But what are you doing?
A little bit of everything, but I have helped out with face-to-face pilot interviews. along the way where I can. And then I've also just been assisting with some work from home roles in building up some content for the assessments. They like to use pilots' skills and knowledge to help put together some of the different aspects of the recruitment phase. So, for instance, there's often a technical question aspect of the recruitment where the prospective candidates are asked some questions that are to do with the technical side of aviation, whether it's different types of aircraft or weather, the regulatory rules. So they've been using my technical knowledge to put together some questions for that.
So is it predominantly an HR role, but you're coming in with the skills?
That's right, yeah. So the recruitment side is predominantly HR trained, and then they source pilots to help with that technical aspect.
Would you do anything differently if you were starting out again? It seems like you've had a great pathway.
I've been really fortunate, I would say, in my career pathway. There are different ways to go about it. Like, for instance, we haven't spoken about it yet, but the military is another option for people wanting to pursue this. The positives to that, again, would be that they're going to pay for all the training for you. So that's another pathway option. But I don't think I would change the way I've done anything. I think I've been pretty fortunate that I've had that funding from a cadet program and that I sort of had guaranteed work to transition into the airlines. That's probably the hardest part to crack, from getting your qualifications, but then trying to gain enough experience to be eligible for the airlines is that difficult transition.
What skills does a good pilot have? Obviously, being able to fly and going through all the checks of instrument ratings and the qualifications is one side. And then you mentioned earlier being able to not be too irrational fight flight. But what skills or traits does a pilot have otherwise?
Yeah, I think another one that is probably initially overlooked is being able to work as part of a team, that sort of team player skill. And also with that comes communication skills, because a lot of the predominant long-term career roles will involve working alongside someone. Often that's someone that you've never met before until you turn up for work. It's a complete stranger. So having that skill set is really, really important to the successful outcome of that flight, because two strangers need to work very cohesively together.
For some reason, it's popped into my mind. Do you have to be able to bitch with the flight attendants? Oh, 24G's being an arsehole. Let's just not get them their wine.
Well, I'd say that's personal choice whether you want to be involved in that banter.
I'd totally be bitching with them, that's for sure. All right, I'm going to put that as a pro for being a pilot. Is there something that you would ask someone who wants to be a pilot to see if they should become one?
Again, I guess it's going to come back to whether aviation is truly a passion or whether they just see the airline pilot as this glamorous role, because the road to that level of your career is not always as easy as it may be made out to be. It's a very competitive environment. It can be very expensive depending on which pathway you take, and it can be difficult to gain that experience for that transition from being technically qualified but then having enough experience to be eligible to apply for the airlines. There can be a lot of roles just to gain experience where you're not going to make good money. The working conditions might not be amazing, but there's so many other people willing to take that job for those conditions purely to gain the experience necessary to apply for those roles.
I think a lot of people who think there's a lot of glamour might also be remembering 2002 hit starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Catch Me If You Can, where he played Frank Abagnale Jr., and he was a goddamn con man. So if you think that you can become a pilot, having flight attendants draped off your arm thinking you can fly a plane like it's Microsoft Simulator 1993, you've got another thing coming for you. And those are my words, Megan, not yours, so you can't get in trouble with your employer.
Yeah, that's probably hitting the nail on the head.
For the record, I Googled Catch Me If You Can. I don't have all that information in my head.
That's a great movie.
I don't remember it because it was 2002. I can't remember anything from even yesterday. So I'll have to take your word for it. But it has, if anyone does want to refamiliarise themselves, 96% Rotten Tomatoes. That's a great rating. I want to know if I can do a basic skill or something as part of our trial episode to see if I have what it takes to become, well, in your case, an international airline pilot. Have you got a challenge for me to see if I have what it takes?
I do have a good challenge for you. There's often, as part of the very early stages of recruitment for the airlines, a lot of them run an online aptitude test. These can involve lots of different things: numerical, verbal, deductive reasoning, lots of fancy words, but essentially they are trying to test your multitasking skills, and they're trying to test your task prioritization under pressure. So I think having a go at one of those as like a little sample test would be a pretty good starting point to see if you've got what it takes.
I have some other follow-up questions as well. So let's see how I go in the next episode, and maybe we'll hear from you in that and see, well, firstly, if it's for me, if you could recommend me going further, but also we get a little more information out of you.
I look forward to it. I'd love to.
Results of the aptitude test and even more questions with Megan Butler in the next episode of the Work Experience Kid podcast. Remember, every trial is an extension of the interview episode. So if you haven't listened to the trial app, make sure you go back, subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and remember to hit up workexperiencekid.com.